We wanted to set the grandeur of a turn-of-the-century small town.
It was a period. It was an absolutely perfect period piece of early Americana.
When we went to the town of Santa Rosa, they recruited local townspeople to play other townspeople. They brought in car clubs and different things to get this period look and the richness that David had in mind.
I think the sets and their authenticity were extremely important in terms of creating the environment that we worked in. This was real. This is how people lived.
1910 was a time period in which people wore more kind of fashionable, kind of fanciful clothes, and people did speak more politely, and it was just kind of a golden, almost fairy tale time, but yet within the grasp of modern history. So that kind of once upon a time aspect served it very well.
In those days, reading was one of the few entertainments besides radio and theater. There was no television, and women read these crunchy novels where they would make them cry. And Pollyanna was a big, tearful read. That was fun, crying it all by yourself in your bed at night.
Eleanor Porter lived in Boston, and so she was quite familiar with that whole New England mindset. She set Pollyanna in a town called Beldingsville, Vermont. Now, in the Disney film, it was changed to Harrington to underscore Aunt Polly's importance in the town.
This is a small town, and you know as well as everybody else, our newspaper is owned by the Harrington family.
Around the turn of the century, towns like Harrington were fairly common. Communities that were founded by, built by, and controlled by one family. Nowadays, we don't see much of that, probably because progress just won't stand for it.
Liver-bellied bunch of miserable sheep, that's what you all are.
But that whole New England era, the white churches with the big steeples and the beautifully manicured parks with the gazebos and the stately Victorian houses, the romance of early Americana.
The small town, the town bazaar.
Finest watermelon at a penny a slice.
All of that was part of Eleanor Porter's life.
It appealed to me because I was sort of Midwestern morality and not having too much education. This was my kind of material.
The director, David Swift, also wrote the screenplay. He had a very deft way of handling the Porter material.
The films I make are reflective of the flyover people in the Midlands. The flyover people between New York and LA, where I come from, grounded in middle-class humor to make you laugh.
Exactly.
Drama to make you cry.
Leave me alone.
I was born in 1919, so I don't quite know the turn of the century. It was all research. Ward Kimball helped me a lot with the preparation for that. He had a book called Among the Folks in History by a very talented artist, and a lot of the old-fashioned things that are in that book we used in the film. Rolling the hoop at the opening, the wagon wheel rim, and just immersed myself in the turn of the century. The first brass bathtub and the front porch was a big piece of entertainment. That was television. People sat on their front porches and watched other people go by. And they said hello and goodbye and they'd come in and have some lemonade. And that was entertainment in those days. And also the remembrance for those older people in the audience of the fairs that we used to have. I still have them back east a little bit. I remember going to shrine picnics. I guess that part I do remember from my childhood. My dad would take me to a shrine picnic, and there was all the ice cream you could eat and all the corn on the cob and fried chicken. Everything was free and great gaiety. They had people, that's where I got the dumping the man in the water. I remember those things from my childhood. And once you hear the horseflies buzzing and see the ice truck going by, you set yourself back in a gentler time, absorb it, and put it up on film. That's why I put the ice truck in, and Moochie and the other kids running after the ice truck and eating ice, stealing ice. I remember that from my childhood.
David was a fellow who came out of animation, if I remember right. He was a visual kind of a fellow. Part of the reason why the film looks so good, the art direction, it's just incredible. This huge mansion that Aunt Polly lived in this huge tree that they built that we would climb up in to go into this house. All of this period art direction and stuff, much of that I think came out of David being so visual and drawing for the art department what he had in mind, and then they would take it from there, and then they would come back to him with what he had in mind, you know. He also used storyboards to a certain extent to convey things.
Dale Hennessy was a story sketch artist on Pollyanna and Parent Trap. A lot of artists can draw what the story is, but you can't get that drawing into the aperture of a camera frame. So it's an art to be able to draw what will fit into the lens of a camera, and Dale had an exact eye for that. Bob Clapworthy designed the production, gave the tone of the picture, all the love and care that a good art director does. He would read the script, then he'd meet with me and ask me how I saw the set or where I saw it, and then he would do a little model of it, and we'd plan camera shots with the model. But other than that, I would show up on the set and there it would be magnificently furnished and decorated.
Aunt Polly's house was absolutely mind-blowing. Huge, incredible sets, and some of which we hardly used, I seem to remember. For a child, that was heaven. You know, when I wasn't filming, I was wandering around the sets and playing in the sets. I had quite a different movie going in all the different rooms.
It gave you a sense of being in that time, being that person. This is the kind of sofas and chairs and carpeting and stairways they went up and down. This is how they served a meal.
Jane was impressed by the setting, if it's possible. I mean, you put an actress in the costume of 1900, turn of the century, and put her in this magnificent home that Disney built for her. I mean, the interiors on this soundstage where we're sitting were just magnificent. You could have put them in a home and put some plaster on it, you would have a magnificent 1900s home. And she was impressed with that, with the finery that Disney put in the set. And everybody in costume sweeps an actress up, and she slipped into Aunt Polly so perfectly.
And where in the world did you get that dress?
Walter Plunkett, our costume designer, was selected by Walt Disney and George Galitzin, our producer, and they couldn't have chosen a nicer man. Thank goodness, it was perfect casting. A fussy old guy, just knew the turn of the century, loved it, would run around the set adjusting buttons and lace doilies and pinning hems of garments and things. It was marvelous to watch. He and the hairdressers enjoyed this picture.
The clothes that Walter Plunkett created, designed, produced for Pollyanna were absolutely glorious. Everybody looked exquisite. Everybody on the set, whatever the part they played, they looked right. And I was more of a tomboy at that age. That was the first time I'd ever stood around in such wonderful clothing. I did enjoy that. And my clothes were wonderful. Every single article was made for me, and including my boots and my hats. And there were hours of costume fittings, all of which I must say I really enjoyed. And he was a very civilized and charming man. I liked him enormously.
Even the way they fixed our hair and put our makeup on, it all kind of had a sense of design that worked very, very well. All of that was done with great care. And I think that you did indeed, as an actor, walk on the set and you were in a special world.
Pollyanna is rich with details, and a creative work. It's the little things that you put together that add the color and the texture and the shading. And that kind of stuff is so rich throughout Pollyanna, and indeed all of the Walt Disney films. They're noted for Walt's attention to detail.
Just looks like a lot of old dusty junk to me.
Walt Disney was a perfectionist, and he demanded that from his drapery department and his camera department. Everybody had to be perfect, except the director.
And of course, you know by now that this is more than the story of Pollyanna Whittier. It's also the story of the town of Harrington and the people who live there.
Santa Rosa 40 years ago was a much smaller community than it is now, so it really had that feeling of being a small town.
Lovely location, which is just northeast of San Francisco. The town adored having us. We used locals for extras, and they enjoyed it. The women's club got all dressed up in these old costumes. Some of the ladies remembered wearing them. I think some of them brought their own clothes. George Galitzin and the cameraman and the art director, Bob Clatworthy, and I just drove around. We spent 3 days and found everything up there. Moochie was the linchpin with his hoop. He showed us all around the town before the train arrived. We improvised a few things that we found that they hadn't seen, like the old water mill,
which is called the Old Bale Mill. It actually is still there, and it has such a rustic look to it. It's not a set piece. It's not something that was built. It's not been whitewashed. It looks very real.
Then we saw a herd of sheep, and we said, stop the camera, set it up, here we go. Moochie, roll that thing through the sheep. He says, well, they'll scare me. I said, do it anyway. He got behind the sheep and he rolled his hoop through the sheep. One of them falls down. We kept rolling and got the shot. Just accidental shots that happened. They gave me a steam locomotive, if you can imagine. And next to the trestle was a dry gulch, and we had to fill it with water. And we hired these young kids to appear in this as if they were starkers in the water as we panned up to see the steam locomotive coming by. And the little boy, I never forget, I wanted to open up on the cheeks of his fanny so you couldn't see anything. It was blacked out. That was the opening shot. He had to swing out naked on this rope and drop into this muddy water and join the other boys swimming. And there were little girls in the neighborhood who rode their bikes over, and he was embarrassed to be naked in front of them. I don't blame him. We had trouble finding locations because of the Victorian homes. Most of them in Los Angeles had been torn down. There were a few in Pasadena, but they didn't have the grounds around them or the high trees that were needed for the story of Pollyanna. We found the location of Victorian homes, but we couldn't find a 3-story one with a garret up on top. So thanks to the creativity of an artist working at the studio here, his name is Peter Ellenshaw, he created that 3rd floor for us by painting it in and combining that painting with the photography.
I was very thrilled many years ago to go up and look for Aunt Polly's house, and I found it. The house was actually called the Mableton Mansion, a beautiful home that didn't have one more story on top. And I knew this, but when I went to it, I looked at it and I said, this looks wrong, because of course the architect for the top story was Peter Ellenshaw, who had painted that beautiful matte painting. Santa Rosa is just a very lovely place, and it's almost comforting in a way to know that this world that Pollyanna takes place in a way is still there, and you can go see it and be part of that.
When we came back to the studio, we had to build a set with a big tree.
The upper floor where the branch comes into the attic, it actually was a mechanical tree that the art department built. The upper floor was on a stage back at the studio in Burbank where we filmed that section. And this huge tree, it actually wasn't there, but you thought it was.
Don't look down.
Coming from a studio like Walt Disney Productions, we had an incredible matte department, and we had Peter Ellenshaw, who's an Academy Award-winning optics person who was a matte artist.
I did 1 or 2 matte shots in it when she falls down out of the window. The set had been built on the stage, and you can't go up too high because you reach the roof. So what we did was look down on the set and add the tree and everything, the height of the tree,
and create the suspense. I'm sure all the little kids were saying, don't let the doll go, don't go for it, don't. That's what we wanted, and I think it came off.
It was movie magic, basically.
It was just a darling location, a darling film, and God bless, there'll never be another. I wish we could make it again tomorrow.